Mm, Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Rajni Krishna. I'm consultant radiologist at SRCC NH Children's Hospital, and I'll be speaking today on the Hubble chest radiograph. So what are basically X-rays? This is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and it falls in between UV rays and those of gamma rays, and it was detected incidentally by the father of radiology, Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen, on November 8th, 1895. And the basic principle of all X-rays is that the beam passes through the human body, and different parts of it are either absorbed or scattered by different internal organs. The remaining rays pass through the body, which are then detected. Initially, it used to be on a film, but nowadays it can be on a computer. This is then recorded, and then further processing is done. We've come a very, very long way in the 100+ years since X-rays were initially discovered, as can be seen from the first initial incidental X-ray detection to what it is in the current situation now. As far as medical radiography is concerned, there are three essential modes in which X-rays are used for medical radiography. The first one is the conventional chest X-ray, or the X-ray mode in which a single image is recorded for later evaluation. This one. It can be used in fluoroscopy or in the cath lab, where you use a continuous X-ray image which is displayed and you get real-time evaluation of a procedure. Commonly, this is done through administering contrast to increase the density and the contrast differentiation for better appreciation of what you want to evaluate. A relatively more recent one is a CT scan, in which as an X-ray beam is passed, there is a continuous moving detector that revolves around the patient, and you get actual slices of the patient. Now, whenever an X-ray comes to you, the first and most important thing that you must do is confirm that the X-ray that you're seeing is belonging to the patient whom you want to see. Confirm the identity of the patient. Also confirm the age of the patient. See whether it is an AP or a PA view. And three very important things that one must look for are penetration, inspiration, and rotation. Now, what is penetration? Penetration basically gauges how deep the X-ray beam is penetrating through the body tissues. And how you see this is on the chest X-ray. You see for the vertebral column and look for the vertebral body and the intervertebral disc. In an adequately penetrated film, you should be able to see the intervertebral disc spaces in the upper 4 or 5 intervertebral disc spaces. This is an over-penetrated film where you can make out the lungs have been burnt out and you can see only the vertebral column. And this is an under-penetrated film where you really can't see any vertebral bodies. Inspiration matters to a great deal, as can be made out from the difference between these two X-rays. For a film with adequate inspiration, that means you should be able to see the posterior ends of the 1st to the 9th ribs, or a more ballpark figure would be the anterior ends of the first 6 ribs. If a film is inadequately inspired, the lungs usually look whiter and you can get erroneous features of, say, consolidation or something like that. Another important thing is rotation. Now, what the textbooks say is that you must see the mid-vertebral line and then see the medial end of the clavicles, and they should be equidistant. In children, this is almost impossible to do. So it's easier to look at the anterior ends of the ribs and see the vertebral column, and you'll get a ballpark estimate whether your film is rotated or it is centralized well. Again, if a film is rotated, the lung that is closer to the film will be darker. The lung which is further away will be whiter, and it will be difficult for you to gauge the X-ray properly. Now, especially as far as pediatrics is concerned, the age of a child is very important. These are 3 X-rays that show that there is something in the suprahilar region. This is a neonate, but this is just the normal thymus, which is an expected thing at this age. This is also an involuting thymus in a 2-year-old, but in a 12-year-old, when you see something like this, it is definitely abnormal. How does a PA or an AP view matter? The primary thing is that in a PA view, the beam comes from behind the patient and the scapulae are thrown off the chest. So you essentially see more of the lungs and the magnification of the heart is much lesser. In contrast to an AP film, where there is always apparent cardiomegaly, and usually the upper zones, you will find parts of the scapula overlying it. Unfortunately, almost all X-rays in pediatrics are AP view primarily because it is difficult to do a PA view in a child. Other views that could be done are listed here. Of these, what is commonly done is the lateral decubitus or the lateral views themselves. Now, especially in post-op scenarios, this lateral view is very useful because you get an idea of the retrosternal space that is there. This gives the surgeon a great help in reopening these sternal sutures. Apart from this, in cases of confusing patches on the lungs, a lateral view will help you to localize it, which we will see further on. Now, dealing with X-rays, our whole life is basically in shades of gray. And this gray can vary from the most black to the least black, depending on the penetration of the X-ray beam through those tissues. So those tissues which allow the least amount of penetration are the most white. This could be all your lines, your tubes, your lines, dense plastic, foreign objects, things like that. And in the human body, the densest tissue will be bone, and the least dense tissue is the air in the lungs, either within the lungs, in the stomach, or in the other cases, free air. How do you go about reporting? Have a mental checklist in your mind, and either you go from out to in or go from in to out so that you don't miss out on anything. Once you've gone layer by layer, find out where your abnormality is, look whether it is fitting into a pattern that would give you a clue to your differential diagnosis, which means either you go from out to in, that is, you go from the bony framework, then the soft tissues, then the pleural spaces, then the trachea, bronchi, lungs, then the mediastinum and the diaphragm, or you go the reverse way from in out. And always, before you decide that you've completed seeing a chest X-ray in its entirety, also look at the visualized abdomen and the neck that is there on the film. When it comes to the bony framework, start off by counting the number of ribs. This is something that almost always is overlooked, but it gives a huge clue to sometimes underlying syndromic conditions. Normally, there should be 12 pairs of ribs. The last pair of ribs, especially in the pediatric age group, may be difficult to see because they may be very small, but they will be seen if you look at them closely. Like, for example, in this case, there are clearly 12 pairs of ribs, whereas here there are only 11 ribs, and there is no floating rib at the 12th place. In cases where you see something like this, where you see subcutaneous emphysema, especially then in those cases, and if there is a history of trauma, trace each rib carefully, and you may find something subtle like this, which is a fracture which is causing this subcutaneous emphysema in this case. This is a slightly older child with coarctation where you can see this rib notching. This is usually not really seen in younger children because the collaterals have not really had time to develop. So you would just probably get cardiomegaly. Apart from the ribs, also look at the spine. This is a case of gross extreme kyphoscoliosis in the thoracic spine. And this, you can generally make out that there is markedly increased bone density. Rarely nowadays, but you might also see changes of rickets or scurvy. You might get changes of syndromic conditions like a mucopolysaccharidosis. And look for the vertebral column, especially because you may see congenital vertebral fusions, segmental anomalies, especially in Bactel associations. You might see something like this, which is quite obviously a large mass. The ribs are not seen very clearly, so one would assume that this is arising from here, and this did turn out to be an Ewing's. But sometimes it may just be something so subtle as indistinct anterior end of a rib, which in this case turned out to be a cold abscess. Now, what about the soft tissues? Once you've seen the bones, the soft tissues are very important because they give you a large number of times, they give you a clue to any underlying pathologies. Look for subtle signs of free air, especially along the lateral chest wall, and this will track along the axilla into the lower neck. Do not confuse skin folds for these because skin folds will suddenly end abruptly, whereas subcutaneous emphysema tracks along the facial planes. Pneumomediastinum that outlines the heart can track into the neck along the trachea. Pneumothorax can track into the lateral chest wall along the side of a tube or so. And malpositioned intercostal drains are a large, very important cause of subcutaneous emphysema. In case there is a gross subcutaneous emphysema, it is safer not to comment on the lungs because the air that is in the subcutaneous emphysema will cause artifactual opacities over the lung. Like for example, this is the case of subcutaneous emphysema along the lateral chest wall, tracking into the axilla and here into the neck. This is just a child who is grossly obese. You can't see basically the soft tissues are extending out of the X-ray film. This was a case of Rohad. Pleural fluid is another very commonly picked up thing on X-rays. It can be something so subtle or it can be something so gross. For minimal amounts of fluid to show, there should be at least 200 ml of fluid before it is seen on an erect X-ray. It varies. Hemithorax, opaque hemithorax would be at least about 3 to 4 liters, sometimes even 5. If you suspect a pleural fluid and it's not really seen very clearly on an erect film, then the best view for such cases is a lateral decubitus film, but this is going out of vogue now. It's usually easier and better picked up on an ultrasound. What you must note is that sometimes the first clue of a subtle effusion can just be a discrepancy in the aeration of lungs, because most pediatric films are supine. So the fluid layers along the chest wall and the entire lung becomes slightly hazy compared to the other normal side. In contrast to pleural effusions, air is seen as the classic description is of a lucency that is devoid of vascular markings. This is the pneumothorax that is seen in this case. It will cause underlying lung collapse. So the underlying collapsed lung is seen as a very sharply defined margin. And because it goes into the CP recesses, the CP recess becomes very deep and lucent compared to the contralateral normal side. Again, here this is a slightly smaller amount of pneumothorax. This is a slightly moderate one. When it is an erect film, air will go to the highest place. So on an erect film, you would get air in the apices. But sometimes if it's a supine film, air will collect anteriorly. So your only point that you would see is that this lung would appear more lucent than this side. In contradistinction to effusion, where the affected lung would be more opaque. Again, a lateral decubitus will show this better, but again, it is not really used so often nowadays. Hydropneumothorax is essentially a combination of these two. So you would get a lucency, but you also get fluid levels within. And you get a combination of features of pneumothorax as well as pleural effusion. So you can get mediastinal shift to the other side. Now, what is the extrapleural sign? This basically is to differentiate whether a opacity that you are seeing is primarily a parenchymal lesion or something that is extrapleural. If you see a peripheral density with a sharp inner margin, but indistinct outer margins, and this has an obtuse angle with the chest wall, this one, then this is typically an extrapleural thing. It is not a primarily lung parenchymal problem. It could be within the pleural space, it could be from the bones, it could be from the soft tissues. Basically, it is not parenchymal. Then you go a little bit further into the trachea and the bronchi. The trachea extends from the inferior margin of C6 till the carina. It is usually in the midline, but in the pediatric age group, a little bit of deviation to the right side is acceptable. It should never get deviated to the left. If the tracheal lucency deviates to the left, then that is definitely pathological. At the level of carina, the tracheal lucency will bifurcate it to the right and the left main bronchus. The right main bronchus will be about half the size of the length of the left main bronchus. It is wider, shorter, and courses more vertically. This applies whether it is a small child or whether it is an older child or whether it is an adult. As I said before, a minimal amount of deviation is okay. And in children, there is something called tracheal buckling, where the trachea deviates to the right side and slightly anteriorly. Almost always in such cases, you would find that these are films that have been taken in expiration. So when you repeat, if you have this doubt and you repeat the X-ray on inspiration, you would find that this normalizes and becomes central. Now here we have a normal trachea with bifurcation into the right and the left main bronchus. Whereas here we can just see a very short truncated bronchus. And on this case, after this level, we can't really see a normal tracheal lucency. So these are abnormalities of the tracheal and bronchial branching. Then once you've completed the trachea and the main stem bronchi, you go further to the lungs, and these are the common patterns of lung opacification that you see. It could be consolidation, it could be interstitial thickenings, it could be atelectatic bands, or you could get nodular opacities or mass lesions. Like the extrapleural sign that I discussed earlier, there is another thing called the silhouette sign, which helps you to primarily localize your lung pathologies. And it says that when there is a loss of differentiation between two similar opacities, that means that there is a loss of fat plane between them. Basically, it says that a mediastinal border, that is your heart and your central mediastinal structures, would only be obscured by that pathological process which is in direct anatomical contact with it. Better appreciated on these, which I'll talk about. For example, this is a right upper lobe collapse, silhouetting the paratracheal region and the aortic knuckle, because that is where the right upper lobe comes in contact with the mediastinum. This is the right middle lobe, where the lower heart border is silhouetted or obscured, in contradistinction to this right lower lobe, where the heart border is quite clean. So even though we do have patchy opacities in the right lung in all three cases, what it is silhouetting is different, and that gives you a clue to where your pathology lies. Similarly, in the left lung, this is a left upper lobe pathology and a lingular pathology, because the pulmonary conus and part of the left heart border is obscured, as is seen here. Whereas in this case, it is clearly retrocardiac and the heart border is okay. So this is a left lower lobe pathology and not a lingular pathology. You can also have cystic lung lesions, something as obvious as this, where you have congenital lobar hyperinflation. It can be something as diffuse as this, where you have tiny cystic areas all over. This is bronchiectasis. And sometimes it can be something like this, which is actually a large cyst filled with some fluid or debris matter. This is also a cyst. It is not a patch of consolidation. Now, this is a patch of consolidation with a cyst, and this cyst is full of some fluid within. Unlike this one, this is a primarily large parenchymal mass lesion in the central right lung, because the entire right heart border is obscured. This turned out to be a large lymphoma. Now, you can also have a vague interstitial pattern where you just see prominent lines. This is your classical pattern of interstitial infiltration. Whereas this is what is commonly seen in a neonate. This is called as whiteout lungs, and this is typical of respiratory distress syndrome. Now, what is respiratory distress syndrome? It's also known as hyaline membrane disease, which is a term that has now fallen out of use. It is typically should be called surfactant deficiency disorder, in which what you would actually note is that if there is a normal chest radiograph in a neonate 6 hours after birth, then you can confidently rule this out and look for something else. There should not be hyperinflation. So that means in RDS, the two primary things is that you would get lung opacity and there is reduced lung volumes. And these typically will change drastically with every repeated X-ray that you take, as is seen in this, where this is the first X-ray of this child that was taken. And progressively, day by day, in every single X-ray that you see, the appearance changes drastically. Then we go to the HiLA, where you look for the shape, look for the symmetry, look for the size, and look for the density. Now, this is quite obviously large, bulky, bilateral hilar mass lesions. But a very important thing to also look for with the hilar is the adjacent heart. If the heart is essentially normal in shape and size, then this would probably be something either post-infective or something else. But if the heart itself is enlarged in size, then the first thing that you look for is an underlying vascular etiology. Then you come to the mediastinum. Now, when you're looking at the mediastinum, it's not just the mediastinum and the heart you look for. Also, just put your gaze a little below the diaphragm and look for the fundic bubble. This is what you see most times where you have normal situs with the heart apex also on the left side and the fundic bubble on the left side. This is a case of situs inversus totalis, where the fundic bubble is on the right, as is the heart apex. And this is a case of situs solitus, abdominal situs solitus, with the fundic bubble on the left, but dextrocardia with the cardiac apex on the right side. Another important thing that you see is you look for the cardiothoracic ratio. In a neonate, 0.6 or more is definitely abnormal. You take a midline, draw the part of the heart on the right side, which is the maximum, draw the part on the left side, which is the maximum. These two need not always be in the same plane because sometimes different chambers of the heart dilate differently. And then you take the maximum diameter of the chest, add these two divided by this, and you would get the cardiothoracic ratio. Also, what has to be noted is that in a normal heart, 2/3 of it, however dilated the heart is, 2/3 of it should be on the left side. This is just a diagrammatic representation of what chamber forms what part of the heart that you see on an AP projection and on a lateral projection. And this is just some of the common causes of cardiomegaly which are named that you see. This is the typical boot-shaped heart with the elevated cardiac apex in DOF. This is a flask-shaped heart with biventricular enlargement and sharply defined heart borders of pericardial effusion. This is the typical snowman heart with a dilated superior mediastinum seen with a slightly dilated lower part. This is the Egon side appearance seen in TGA. And this is the grossly dilated cardiomegaly with a box-shaped heart that is typically seen in Ebstein's. Now, the way we saw pleural air and pleural effusion, you can also get pneumomediastinum or pericardial effusion. You suspect pneumomediastinum when not just the heart borders are sharply defined, but you also see what is called a continuous diaphragm sign, where you see air outlining the entire diaphragmatic inferior border of the heart. In pneumomediastinum, because it outlines the junction lines of both the lungs, you would see the posterior junction line between both lungs very clearly posterior to the heart. And in pericardial effusion, you get dilated heart size with relatively sharply defined margins. Then you see the diaphragm, as I said before. Normally, the right diaphragm would be a little bit higher than the left, but this discrepancy would be less than one vertebral body in size. In this case, quite obviously, the left diaphragm has been pushed down by this free air within the pleural space. In this case, the right diaphragm is pushed up because of hepatomegaly. As I said, this is the normal one. This is an elevated left hemidiaphragm here. This one, especially medially, because of this underlying collapse in the lower lobe. This is a post-op case with non-visualization of the right hemidiaphragm laterally, where it has been removed. And this is one where you just can't see the left hemidiaphragm because there is congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and all the abdominal contents have come up into the chest space. Once you've seen all these, there are some specific areas that you look for. This includes the apices, the hilar, the retrocardiac region, and just below both the diaphragmatic domes, because this is where you can usually see subtle pathology which you would otherwise miss. And as I said before, once you've finished seeing the whole chest, always look at the abdomen. For example, here you can see that this child has ingested a foreign body. This is grossly dilated bowel loops with ileus. And here you can see free air under both domes of diaphragm. Another thing probably of interest to anesthetists is the presence or absence of cervical ribs, because that would alter your counting of the ribs. Cervical rib is a rib that arises from C7 vertebra, and the way that you differentiate it is that the transverse process points up, and usually this rib will be very small and it's not a complete rib. Some rare occasions you may get a large cervical rib which looks like a first rib, in which case you look at the transverse process. Also, in some cases, you would see a lateral view of the neck. This would give you a clue to enlarged tonsils, which may cause problems during intubation. This is an enlarged pharyngeal tonsil. This is an enlarged palatine and a lingual tonsil. And this is a classical case of Pierre Robin, where you get this micrognathic appearance and you get this large soft tissue here because of the tongue, which is blocking the airway. This is a normal neck lateral. You also, as I said before, you look for the cervical vertebra, not just for fusion anomalies as in this case, but sometimes you may also get something like this, which is dislocation, atlantoaxial dislocation. Then we go to common tubes and lines that are seen on the chest X-ray. The first of which is the nasogastric tube. This is how a nasogastric tube should look. The tip should be seen very clearly coiled below the diaphragm within the stomach. This is acceptable, as is this. But this or this is not acceptable. The tip of the nasogastric tube should be below the diaphragmatic dome. Rarely it may go into the trachea, it may go into the bronchus, it may cause esophageal or pharyngeal perforation if it perforates and goes into the mediastinum. Another thing that you may see is a nasojejunal tube, which goes beyond the stomach, crosses the duodenum, crosses the entire duodenum, comes back onto the left side, and the tip should be seen in the jejunal lobes. Now, this is a large nasojejunal tube which is malpositioned and coiled completely within the stomach. Then comes an endotracheal tube. Normally, the tip should be 2 centimeters above the carina. Somewhere, usually, if you can't really see the carina, the tip should be at the medial end of the clavicle or thereabouts. This is definitely malpositioned where it has gone into the right main bronchus, as has gone here into the right main bronchus. And because of this, there is complete opacification of the left lung. A tracheostomy tube also has a similar position, and the tip should be seen at around T3 level. Then we come to CVP lines. Look for a CVP line, whether it is inserted from the jugular or whether it is inserted from the subclavian, whether it is right-sided, whether it is left-sided. And the tip of any CVP line should be at the azygoesophageal junction. This is usually the bump that is seen between, it comes at the level where the aortic knuckle just starts appearing. So at this bump, this is where the tip of the CVP line should be. It should correspond to the first anterior intercostal space. Now, for example, this is high. This should be somewhere here, whereas this is low. Again, this should be somewhere here. This is definitely much lower. It should be somewhere here. The basic problem with this is that if it is too low and it is within the right atrium, these children have a higher chance of arrhythmias. Whereas if it is too high, then these lines tend to get thrombosed earlier. This is when you've positioned it. Sometimes during positioning itself, you can get complications. Like you may get a hematoma at the site of injection. You may get pneumothorax, hemothorax. You can get associated infections. You can get thrombosis, or you can get line fractures or kinks like this. Now, a PICC line is similar to a CVP line, as in the tip should be at the same location, but it will usually go along the undersurface of the clavicle and then go into the heart. What you must note is that all PICC lines should go along the undersurface of the clavicle. If they go along the upper margin, then that means that this is an intra-arterial placement of the line, and that needs to be informed to the clinicians. Here we can see that this is a PICC line that has been inserted from the left. It's gone up from the subclavian, it's gone up into the IJV, and the tip is lying in the neck. Whereas this is a PICC line that has been inserted from the brachial, and it is just over the clavicle. It has to be pushed further in. Now, in neonates, you might also see umbilical arterial and venous catheters. This is an umbilical arterial catheter, and this is a venous catheter. The umbilical arterial catheter has this curved course because it follows the course of the iliacs and then goes into the aorta and then is placed further. Whereas the umbilical vein will go from the umbilical vein directly into the left portal vein, then through the ductus venosus into the middle left hepatic vein, and then into the IVC. Now the tips should lie of the venous catheter should be at the level at or just above the level of the diaphragm. Basically, it should be in the junction of the IVC with the right atrium. The umbilical arterial catheter has two positions. Either it can be high or it can be low. High is from D6 to D10. Low is L3 to L5. But it should not be between D10 to L3 because this is where most of the major aortic branches are taking off. These are malpositioned umbilical catheters. This is very high. It is within the right atrium. Whereas the arterial catheter has been pushed too far up. It's gone almost into the aortic arch. This is the malpositioned umbilical venous catheter, which has gone through the portal vein into the right portal branch. Now, you might also see Hickman catheters, which are commonly used to give chemotherapy or for medications in children. And these typically have a very long subcutaneous tunnel before they come out. The tip should again be at the SVC-RA junction. And this is a normal Hickman catheter, whereas this is an abnormal one where instead of going down into the heart, it has crossed through the brachiocephalic, into the brachiocephalic vein. Similar to the Hickman, you might also see a dialysis catheter where again there is a slightly long subcutaneous tunnel with the port on the outside. Now, chemo ports are again, they look very similar to a dialysis or a Hickman, but this is what a chemo port looks like. Sometimes instead of this slightly loosened area, it can be seen as an opacity, which shouldn't be mistaken for, say, a metastatic nodule or something like that. Now, sometimes in the ICU or in post-op patients, we would see something confusing like this. So we'll just go through what these numerous lines and tubes are. There are intercostal drainage tubes which correctly should be placed between the visceral and the parietal pleura, depending on the indication for which the drain has been inserted. If it is for a pneumothorax, then the tip should be antero-superior because that is where the air collects. If it is to drain pleural effusions, then the tips should be posterior-inferior. Rarely it can go into the lung parenchyma. It can go into a pleural fissure. It may cause mediastinal or abdominal trauma while passing through. And sometimes when you pull it out, you may get re-expansion pulmonary edema. Now this, as I said before, is an intercostal drainage tube, whereas this is a mediastinal drainage tube. These are mediastinal pacing wires. These are mediastinal pacing wires with the tips seen overlying the ventricular chambers. This is a pacemaker battery with the wire and the leads. Now, when you see a pacemaker battery with the wires, trace the wires carefully, look for continuity of the wire, look for kinking, and see whether the battery is okay and whether it is contained within its sleeve. Multiple times you will see numerous types of surgical staples. These are surgical staples. These are also surgical staples. These are also surgical staples. And you would also see sternal sutures. Now, these are sternal wires before the suture has been tied. This is after it has been tied, and this is the same suture seen on a lateral film. So when we go back to the old X-ray, this is an endotracheal tube. These are esophageal cardiac pacing wires. This is a mediastinal drainage tube. This is the intercostal drainage tube. This is your nasogastric tube that is coming down, this one. These are cardiac pacing wires. This is your cardiac drainage tube, and these are accessory structures. These are clamps for the cardiac drains, and this is just catheter tube that is coiled. So when you do take an X-ray for a child, as far as possible, try to remove all these extraneous things from your field of view so that you get clearer images of exactly where your lines and tubes are placed. This is how radiopaque coils look post procedure. And these are how closure devices look. This is a PDA, this is a coarctation stent. This is a PDA closure device because it's overlying the conus. This is an ASD closure device because it's overlying the place of the atrial septum. Sometimes you would also see long tubes like this that pass from the neck across the chest over the abdomen, which is typically a VP shunt. Now, if you see carefully, the one on the left, again, if you follow it, it is continuous and it is smooth. Whereas the one on the right, quite obviously, is acutely kinked here. And apart from acutely kinked, is also discontinuous. So this is probably a kinked, broken right VP shunt. This is a malpositioned shunt because you're seeing the upper end of it. Normally in a VP shunt, the upper end would go over the field of view and go up into the head. But here you can see the tip. That means this tube has been pulled down. Now, rarely sometimes you would see some faint opacity like this. This is not an ingested foreign body. It is just a gastrostomy button. And last but not least, we must also speak about COVID. Generally, in COVID cases, chest radiography is known to be less sensitive than CT, but especially in pediatric population, it is much more frequently done rather than a CT. So you must always have a very high index of suspicion. There is no classical feature that this is COVID and nothing else. But if you do see something like this, basically bilateral hazy infiltrates in both lungs, always think of COVID, get a COVID testing done. And it is always better to be more cautious than not. Now, this is the consensus statements that have given that say that there are typical indeterminate, negative, or atypical findings that are seen in chest radiographs. These are just representative images where in the typical one, you would get bilateral, predominantly lower lobe consolidations. In the indeterminate, you get either a unilateral peripheral or you get central with or without peripheral ground glass. It may be bilateral, it may be multifocal. In atypical, you would get a single lobe involvement. And in negative, you will get something that doesn't really suggest pneumonia, basically something like this, hydroadenopathy. But again, I repeat that these are all very vague findings. If you do see something abnormal, always keep your antenna open and think that it may be COVID. What it says sequentially, that it should be offered to children as appropriate to assess the response to therapy, evaluate clinical deterioration, and to assess positioning of life support devices post-recovery. And post-recovery follow-up imaging is really not recommended for asymptomatic pediatric patients. If there are pediatric patients with prior COVID infection with persistent or worsening symptoms, then you can get a chest X-ray done again. But if there is really a severe clinical sign, then a CT is always better than a chest X-ray. Thank you.